All right, so content-wise for today, we're going to talk a little bit about distances and counterattacks and counter times. So I know our fencers who are knight errants who are working on getting knighthood. Counter time is one of the things that comes up there that people are like, whoa, what's that? So we want to talk about that a little bit. Coach Drew and I were talking about our tactical distances a little bit last night, so I figured maybe a good time to go over that. And one thing we can kind of do is look at how that plays into the counterattack and the counter time and the invitation, since those are actions that you guys should be starting to develop if you're in that sort of higher tier level of where your fencing is. So when we talk about our tactical distances, or the distance system that we get from Coach Aaron, and again, our version is a little different from his. What are our four distances? My question was going to be how many distances there are, but I've already just told you there's four. All right, so we have four distances. So distance 4, the top, where we've got our fencers kind of far away from each other. There's two ways that these counts work. The first is roughly the number of actions, or the number of tempos. So at this distance, the Timber and I are away from each other, we're at about distance 4. So that means if I attacked, even though I'm way out of distance right now, Timber could then make an attack which would close the distance more. I could maybe parry Timber's attack. I'd be too far away for Timber to parry mine, but also too far away to hit. So once I make mine, that's going to put us at about distance 3. Timber's going to make his. I parry. I close distance more as I make my repost. That's putting us at distance 2. Timber parries. He closes distance a little more, and he hits. So that means 4 actions could happen from that point. So that's a way for you to kind of figure out how far apart the distances are, is how far away are you that you could make 4 actions before you would end up coming together if the distance closed on each action. Distance doesn't always close on every action. Sometimes the distance stays the same. So that's an important thing to consider with this. But the idea of this is based on the distances closing each time an action is done. So distance 3, 3 actions can happen. Distance 2, 2 actions can happen. Distance 1, your opponent can't really respond to your action, just the one action should happen. With the caveat that in FA, because the blades are a little thicker, sometimes you can get a more effective parry at distance 1 and make a repost. In foil, with the infighting, sometimes you can kind of play things out a little bit at distance 1, but it starts to fall apart a little bit there. It's much more likely that a hit's just going to happen. So one of the ways you can look at that is, say again, Timber and I are fencing. Say we're at distance 3, and I decide I'm going to make a feint. Now maybe my feint is not so much something where I'm trying to draw him to attack me, or where I'm trying to draw a parry for me to deceive it. Maybe my feint is I'm going to make a full action and allow Timber to parry my action. So Timber parries me, and we'll make Timber the smarter fencer on this one. Timber makes the feint, and I fall into it. I'm like, oh no, he's attacking me, I better respond. So I parry and I lunge out and close the distance on that. So now we're at distance 2 when I make my repost. So Timber parries and he steps in sharply and closes the distance and hits me. So at that point, he's now at a distance where I'm going to have a very difficult time responding, and he has a very easy time hitting. So he can kind of plan ahead that he's like, all right, at this distance, he should be able to make one action against my action. But if he closes distance, I'm going to be able to shut down his action. He's not going to be able to do anything when I shut the action down next. So you can start to kind of plan it out as, when do you take your turn versus when do you allow your opponent to take their turn. So epee guys, you always hear me shouting to you guys, close the distance, once you've got the blade. So if you don't have the blade, you don't want to just blindly close the distance because you're just going to get hit. But if you've got control of their blade and you're closing the distance, you're increasing the likelihood that you're going to be able to hit. If Time Bomb and I are fencing and say we're at distance 2 and I attack and Time Bomb parries and he reposts, and I kind of expand the distance again on his repost so that his repost stays on distance 2. If Time Bomb doesn't try to close the distance aggressively on his repost, he allows me to do that. So now we've got another tempo that can happen. So now I can make another action. And if he keeps the distance the same, we can both keep doing that. We can both keep comfortably defending the action. Whereas if we're at distance 2 and I make an attack and time bomb parries, and instead of allowing me to keep the distance at distance 2, he sharply closes the distance as he makes his repost, or it begins closing the distance as he makes his parry, then I'm not going to have time to get away. I'm not going to have time to make a counter action. I'm not going to have time to reparry him. I'm just going to have time to get hit. So epee guys, when I'm always like, once you've got the blade, start closing, whereas a lot of you guys take the blade and start opening distance. And you guys have seen that. When you take the blade and you open the distance, you reset the timing, right? So your opponent redoubles in and hits you. Your opponent gets the remise because you're giving them space to take another action. But when you guys take the blade and close, does your opponent hit the remise? No. Do you hit? Yes. So not 100% foolproof thing. It's a human interaction. So stuff can happen that's different than what you're expecting. But it's a fair system for coming up with what's likely to happen. So if you model what you're doing based on this idea, you can kind of control who has the ability to hit on what turn. So we don't always think about fencing as turn-based, but fencing is pretty turn-based, and I always hated that when I was a fencer, that referees didn't always look at when something was being initiated, they looked at whose turn it was. But when you start understanding it as being turn-based, then you can kind of manipulate the right-of-way and the right-of-way weapons, and you can manipulate the breakdown in the conventional. In the combat weapon. Right-of-way weapons are the conventional weapons. So it's a good way to think about how things are breaking down. The other way to look at it is responsiveness and probability of hitting. So at distance 4, Timber and I are about distance 4 right now. If I attack Timber right now, is Timber going to do anything? No. You don't feel threatened at all at this distance, right? I can take my blade and jump up and down and wave my arms and spin around, and that's going to have as much effect on you as if I take an advanced lunge. The effect is going to be 0 in both cases. You're just going to look at me and be like, this guy doesn't know how to fence. What is he doing? So, at distance 4, I can't hit you, and no one is going to respond to a feint because they know you can't collapse the distance effectively there. Now at distance 3, I'm not going to get closer because we're social distancing. But if I got closer, if I was on the other side of where this bench is, and we were at about distance 3, if I attack Timber, is he going to flinch? Maybe. Yeah. So, and that's kind of your test, is the flinch test. So if I attack Timber and he might flinch, then there's a chance that if I attack Timber, he might try to parry it, right? Especially if there's a lot of pressure going on. If I have a lead, and if we're in the 3rd period, or if we're at the end of the strip and he's not comfortable fencing at the end of the strip, or if he's had a bad day and he's like, I really need to win this bout, or if this is the last bout that he needs to win in order to make it into the DE round, or if this is the DE that he needs to win in order to get his next rating, and he's starting to feel all of that and think, okay, I have to make this work, I have to make this work, then he's going to be more responsive to stuff. If it's like a no pressure situation for Timber, if like he's got the lead and if he's already rated higher than what the tournament's rated, and if he's had a great weekend and everything is going rosy and nice for him, then he's just going to be calm and be like, why is this guy making an attack from so far away? I'm going to take a half step back and not worry about it, which is still a response. Or maybe he'll just be like, why is this guy making an attack from so far away? He's going to miss me, I don't have to move. And then he'll be close enough that I can step in and take an action. So distance 3 is a maybe spot. You're not likely to hit at distance 3. But there's a possibility that your opponent will respond to a feint or an attack or an invitation, especially if you're moving in a way that looks like you're going to close the distance, or especially if there's factors in the moment that are going to pressure your opponent into being more responsive than typical. Distance 2, if I were standing basically in line with where Starman is, and like that distance away from Timber, and I attacked him, is Timber going to respond? Yeah. Yeah, it'd be ridiculous for him not to respond, because at distance 2, I can hit him. So he's pretty much got to respond at distance 2. It should occur as long as he's not half asleep or not paying attention or just doesn't care about the battle. As long as he's like in the game, he's going to respond to me there if I make an action distance 2. Now that action could be I make an attack. That action could be I come forward, suddenly stop, and my hand drifts to the side in a way that looks like I've just sort of broken my line on a compound accidentally. Then maybe Timber is going to counterattack me. Maybe that's an invitation trying to draw the counterattack. If I make a feint, maybe Timber will slow down, maybe Timber will stop if he's on the attack, or maybe he'll finish his attack. If I'm on the attack, maybe Timber will parry my feint. There's a lot of different options based on what my action is and what the situation is as far as who's on offense, who's on defense, and also what types of actions your opponent favors. If I'm fencing somebody who just doesn't have good blade work and is really out of balance and doesn't move well, maybe their response to my feint is going to be they twist around and tie themselves up in knots where they can't really move, and then I just step forward and hit them again.
How would that even happen?
There's some fencers where they do weird stuff. So
Well, like, but isn't that illegal to hit your back?
if they turn their back, yeah, but like if they're just like that and can't move out of it because they're trying to dodge you, like it's all going to depend on the fencer and what they do, and it's going to depend on the situation as to what kind of response you're going to get. But you as a fencer need to be aware of those things. You need to know what your opponent does, and you need to know where you are in the situation of the bout in order to see what makes sense as a response, so that you can kind of figure out what kind of response you're going to have. Distance 1. So if I'm about in line with where Mouse is, so for those listening at home, Starman was about 3 people away from Timber, and Mouse is about 1 to 2 people away from Timber. If I attack, I'm going to hit Timber, right? If I attack well enough, Timber's going to try to parry, and it's not going to matter. I'm going to hit him before he parries. If Timber tries to counterattack, I'm still going to land my attack. He's not going to be able to counterattack in a way that locks me out, probably not in any of the weapons. And if he tries to distance pull, I should be able to see that and make my lunge long enough that I still finish through the distance pull.
What if I do that when I'm jump off the strip?
If you jump off the strip, it's a yellow card.
I just got.
If you just make an esquive where you're still on the strip, then maybe. That's like your one shot there. But you're also changing the distance at that point, right? So you're expanding the distance, so it's changing the way the tempos work.
Which way are you moving off the strip is the question.
There you go. But so that's part of how the distances work also, in terms of can you get someone to do something, can you hit them? So when we think about that, we can apply that to our actions like counterattacks and counter times and to invitations and feints. So who can tell me what an invitation is? TB.
Invitation is where you open up and accept and make a feint, but you're trying to invite your opponent to attack.
Very good. So you hit on like all the points on that. So basically, Time Bomb's answer was that you create an opening and you step in. It's like a feint, but the purpose is to invite an attack. So on a feint, I'm doing something where I'm making something that's not real. On an invitation, I'm also making something that's not real. But on a feint, I might do it by extending my blade. I might do it by beating my opponent's blade. I might do it by moving my shoulders and my chest. I might do it by moving my feet. There's different ways that I can make changes where it looks like aggression is happening, but is not actually happening. A feint is almost always going to be a false aggression. And the responses in a feint are broader. The response could be an attack. It could be to make them stop or change directions. It could be to adjust their timing or speed. It could be to draw a parry. An invitation is a feint, is a faked opening. So when I make an invitation, I'm doing something to try and draw out an action. I can do that in epee by extending my arm into a false attack. But in most of the weapons, it's going to be something where I break the line of my hand in some way that allows an opening to occur on my target so that it makes the target attractive to your opponent. Now, Time Bomb noted also the idea of stepping in, which you can make an invitation without stepping in, but if I make the invitation while the distance is changing, I'm now giving my opponent more than one thing to analyze. So it's a lot harder to analyze as you have more things happen. So if my speed changes, my distance changes, and my hand position changes, my opponent has to pay attention to all of those things at once and make a decision about all of those things at once. If just my hand position changes, that's all my opponent has to think about, right? Now, it's not just a matter of at what distance am I, it's a matter of if the distance is changing. Your opponent already recognizes where you are if the distance is staying the same. They recognize how fast you're moving and how that's going to break down if your speed remains the same. The change is the thing that they have to analyze. So if you're changing your speed and you're changing your distance and you're changing your hand position, you're giving them too much to think about to make a viable choice. And so the likely thing to happen is the reflexive trained choice. And so if they're used to a coach making an opening for an attack in a lesson, and you speed up and step in and create that same opening, they should have a reflexive response to attack it. And you should have a sense of when and where the attack is coming, and now it's easier for you to make a parry, and make a repost, or maybe to make some sort of counter hit or a distance move, depending on the distance and how you're moving. Again, not guaranteed. It depends somewhat on your opponent, and it depends on the situation, but those are elements that you can use. Counter time, who knows what a counter time is? Quicksilver? Oh, okay. Timber.
I'm not sure.
Time Bomb?
This is like when you counter the counter attack.
Yes. So the tempo in which a counterattack happens is essentially within the tempo of the attack. So the attack is either initiated or should be initiated, and you make an action within the time that the attack is happening before the attack finishes. So, and then you're able to evade the attack happening on a counterattack. The counter time is happening within that counter tempo. So within the tempo in which a counterattack would be occurring against the attack, you're making an action against that counterattack. So your counter time action can be a counterattack against a counterattack. So Time Bomb and I are fencing, Time Bomb feints an attack, I go to counter his feinted attack thinking it's real, and then he adjusts back and hits me with a counterattack on my attempt to hit him. That's an action scored in counter time. He's not necessarily just finishing the attack that he starts on the feint, he's changing something in his line, changing something in his movement to evade my attack so that he's moving to an action that's attempting to counter me without being offensive. He's on the counter offensive now. You could also do it where, say, Starman and I are fencing, and I come forward and I feint a cut to his back shoulder, and he goes in to make a counterattack against my feinted cut to my back shoulder, and I step in and close out with a parry and hit on the repost. So I can draw that counterattack in order to parry the counterattack and make the repost where I now have an open line, and he no longer has the opportunity to make a counteroffensive against my action, against my offensive action. That's where you have the benefit on the counter time. I already went over what the counterattack is while explaining the counter time. So your moment for making a counterattack, if your opponent's blade is not in line, so if my blade's absent, if I'm moving my blade away as the distance is closing, or as the speed is increasing where I should be attacking, if I'm compounding and the compound pulls the blade away from an attacking position where I'm not going to have an easy time attacking, and I'm speeding up where I'm closing the distance as that's happening, those are all moments where a counterattack can happen. If I'm transitioning into the distance where an attack should have happened, or if I'm maintaining a distance where the attack should have happened, then the counterattack can happen at that point if I'm not initiating the attack and I'm like building up the attack, or I haven't realized I'm at that distance yet. If I'm changing my speed incorrectly, that's a point where I'm probably vulnerable to a counterattack. If I'm at a distance where I should be speeding up into the attack, but for some reason I slow down and my blade's not positioned in order to finish, that one doesn't happen as often. Well, actually, no, that happens a lot. You force that to happen sometimes. And that's a really great moment to make a counterattack because they're not moving fast enough to finish and hit you. The one that you're probably less likely to see happen is a point where they should be slowing down, but they speed up. You get that sometimes where they're developing an attack and you're kind of disrupting the attack to slow them down, but instead of slowing down, they speed up and they end up speeding up into your disruption, and so you can finish the counterattack and get away quicker. So that thing where there's a wrong change in speed based on the distance, that's a moment where you can make a counterattack. The big thing is you want to see some error in the footwork or error in the distance or speed, and you want to see the blade in a position where they can't easily finish the hit, and you need to either be in a position where you can hit and get past them, hit and pull distance away, or hit and stop their blade, or escape so that they miss it. Counter time, you can simulate those moments where it would draw the counterattack. So if Timber and I are fencing, and Timber's like, oh, I'm gonna make a touch and embarrass Coach BJ with this touch. So Timber comes up and he's like right outside the distance to make the attack. So he has his blade kind of in line and he moves it into absence as he speeds up and maybe like puts his shoulder or his chest more forward so that I'm like, oh, I can attack that and get out of the way. But then Timber's pullback is actually just him flicking my attack. I'm now creating an opening for the counterattack. He's finishing his attack. He doesn't even need to stop me from hitting or make me miss because it's just going to look like he's finishing the attack there. But say maybe he knows I have a good last second parry and he wants to be able to close the distance on that. Maybe he's going to do the same thing. Maybe he'll pull his hand into a lower absence as he kind of speeds up to draw my counter. And then he's able to close into a fifth parry and then step in and hit me. He's now shut down the distance and blocked my blade out so that I can't hit him and I don't have the opportunity to parry. So he's made an action in counter time where he's taking the blade and has effectively used that. Where that lines up with our distances, going from 4 to 3 doesn't help you on that, right? Like going from 4 to 3, maybe as you're entering 3, you can start some of the setup for this, but the place where it's going to happen is between 3 and 2. In 2, that's where like the attack is probably going to be happening, probably should be happening. So if you're moving from 3 to 2, that's where you can start setting up the counterattack situation in order to draw the counterattack and then score in counter time. If you're maintaining in 2, that's the point where you can make the counterattack if they make a mistake. If they're transitioning from 2 into 1 without attacking, that's probably where you should have made an attacking prep by that point, or should have made a counterattack by that point, because they're starting to get to where they're too close. So that's the way you can look at this distance model in conjunction with looking at these timing actions and these ways of setting up and manipulating the action. All right, so I get for like some of you who are still a little newer, like that may have been a little more than than you're necessarily thinking, but like Time Bomb, Quicksilver, Timber, even to some degree Beetle and Mouse. A little bit much for you for the yellow foil still, but
I understand it. I just think you gotta execute it about.
yes, it's a lot to try to get to the point of execution. But for our Knight Errants and our almost Knight Errant, these are things where you guys should be able to think about it and start using some of these ideas. And they're ideas you guys have seen enough that you should be able to use it. This is stuff Stretch is working on trying to do. Beefy was taking lessons on this week. So it's stuff where you guys can do it, but it's stuff that's like sort of on the higher end of things. Stuff Bard should probably be thinking about. So a lot of stuff to cover there, but again, important stuff. Again, we're taking time to go over some of this stuff and using the fact that we have a slightly longer class time and the fewer people to do this so that you guys can get a grounding in it, but also it gives us something to do for the people at home so that they're still getting some fencing and still learning some stuff. So